Barron Trump shocked the world with his act. We're going to tell you more about it now. The school day at the elite Oxbridge Academy was coming to an end. Students, as usual, were rushing home, discussing the upcoming weekend, while teachers were packing up their belongings, preparing for a well-deserved rest. But at that time, Mrs. Rodriguez, the school janitor, was just beginning her shift. Her workday started when the school emptied out, allowing her to quietly carry out her duties. With a bucket, mop, and cloth in hand, she methodically cleaned the hallways, classrooms, and restrooms so that everything would shine with cleanliness the next morning. Her movements were precise and her gaze focused. She knew her work was important, even if no one noticed it. Mrs. Rodriguez was a middle-aged woman with kind but tired eyes. Her hands, roughened from constant labor, moved with practiced skill. She always tried to do her job perfectly, even if no one acknowledged it. Her life was full of hardships, but she never complained. She knew her work was a way to provide her three children with everything they needed. Her eldest son dreamed of becoming a doctor. Her middle daughter wanted to be a teacher, and her youngest son had just started school. For the sake of their future, she was willing to work three jobs, sacrificing her time and health. Every evening, returning home, she found the strength to smile at her children, tell them stories, and help with their homework. Her days were scheduled down to the minute, but she never allowed herself to give up. Barron Trump, as usual, stayed late at school, working on a project in the library. He often stayed late to focus on his studies in silence. That evening, as he left the library, he noticed Mrs. Rodriguez. She was on her knees trying to scrub a paint stain off the floor. Her face looked tired, and her movements were slow and strained. Barron stopped, watching her. He had seen her before, but had never thought about how hard her job must be. At that moment, he felt a strange unease. He felt ashamed that he had never paid attention to her work. He began to think about how many people, like Mrs. Rodriguez, go unnoticed despite their significant contributions to the school's life. The next day, Barron couldn't get the image of Mrs. Rodriguez out of his mind. He decided to learn more about her. After asking the school administrator, he found out that she had been working at the school for over 10 years. Her husband had died in a car accident several years ago, and since then, she had been raising three children on her own. To support her family, she worked three jobs: at a cafe during the day, at the school in the evening, and cleaning offices on weekends. Her life was filled with endless labor, yet she always found the strength to smile and be kind to those around her. Barron was struck by her resilience and selflessness. He couldn't imagine how she managed to handle so many responsibilities. Her life seemed incredibly difficult to him, but at the same time, inspiring. He realized he had to do something to help her. He couldn't just sit back, knowing how hard her life was. Barron started by sharing his thoughts with a few friends. He told them about Mrs. Rodriguez and her challenging life. His friends were moved by the story and agreed to help. Together, they decided to organize a fundraiser to do something special for her. Barron knew that simply raising money was good, but he wanted it to be something more. He wanted Mrs. Rodriguez to feel appreciated and respected. He wanted her to understand that her work didn't go unnoticed, that her efforts were important to everyone. Barron and his friends began by sharing their idea with teachers and students. They created posters with the words, "Let's say thank you to Mrs. Rodriguez," and hung them all over the school. The posters included information on how to donate and why it was important. The teachers immediately supported the initiative. Many of them knew Mrs. Rodriguez personally and were touched by her story. The students also responded. Some donated their pocket money, while others offered to help organize the event. Even parents, upon learning about the fundraiser, began sending in donations. Barron was amazed at how quickly the amount grew. Soon they had raised enough money to organize not just a gift, but an entire event. Barron reached out to a well-known TV host who often helped people in difficult situations. He shared Mrs. Rodriguez's story, and the host agreed to help. Together, they planned a surprise event to share her story with a wider audience. Barron wanted her story to inspire others to do good deeds. He believed her example could be a source of inspiration for many. On the day of the surprise, Mrs. Rodriguez came to work as usual. She was met by the school principal, who asked her to come to the assembly hall. She had no idea that the entire school staff, students, teachers, and even her children were waiting for her there. When she entered the hall, she was greeted with loud applause. A huge banner on the stage read, "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez." Barron stepped onto the stage with a microphone in hand and told everyone about her hard work, selflessness, and kindness. He spoke about how her example had inspired him and many others. He thanked her for everything she did for the school and its students. Then the TV host came on stage. He announced that thanks to the donations from students, teachers, and parents, they had been able to do something special for her. She was presented with a certificate for a family dinner at the best restaurant in town, as well as a scholarship fund to cover her children's college education. Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't hold back her tears. She was overwhelmed that her work had been noticed and appreciated. Her children, standing beside her, beamed with pride for their mother. It was a moment she would remember for the rest of her life. Mrs. Rodriguez's story quickly spread across social media. People from all over the world left comments expressing admiration for her hard work and Barron's kindness. Many said the story inspired them to be kinder and more attentive to those around them. Mrs. Rodriguez became a local celebrity. Her children were proud of their mother, and she herself felt that her efforts had not been in vain. As for Barron, he realized that even one kind act could change someone's life. This story became a reminder that kindness and gratitude can work wonders. Barron showed that even a small gesture can grow into something much bigger when driven by a sincere desire to help. After that unforgettable day, Mrs. Rodriguez's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. She continued working at the school, but now her work was viewed differently. Students who used to walk past her without a second glance now greeted her warmly, smiled, and thanked her for her efforts. Teachers who had always appreciated her work began to take more time to talk to her, ask how she was doing, and offer their help. Even parents, when attending school meetings, would approach her to express their gratitude. Mrs. Rodriguez felt that her efforts were finally being recognized, and this gave her a renewed sense of purpose and strength. Barron, observing the shift in how people treated Mrs. Rodriguez, realized that his act of kindness was just the beginning. He decided that he needed to continue helping people who often went unnoticed, despite their significant contributions to society. Together with his friends, he founded a school club called the Light of Kindness. The club's mission was to identify those in need of support and offer them help. This included not only school staff, but also students facing challenges or even members of the local community who required assistance. The club's first project was the creation of a wall of gratitude in the school's main hallway. On this wall, anyone could leave a note of thanks to someone, whether it was a teacher, a classmate, a school staff member, or even a friend. The idea quickly caught on, and the wall soon filled up with heartfelt messages. Mrs. Rodriguez often stopped by the wall to read the notes, many of which were addressed to her. These messages reminded her that her work was valued and inspired her to keep going. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rodriguez's story continued to gain traction on social media. Her story reached local news outlets and eventually national television. Journalists came to the school to interview her. At first, she felt shy and uncomfortable in front of the cameras, but she soon realized that her story could inspire others. She spoke about the importance of being kind, hardworking, and resilient, even when life seemed unfair. Her words resonated with thousands of people who wrote her letters and comments, sharing their own stories and offering words of encouragement. One day, Mrs. Rodriguez received a letter from a large company offering her a job with a higher salary and a more flexible schedule. They had been moved by her story and wanted her to join their team. This offer was a true blessing for her, as it meant she could spend more time with her children and no longer work 3 jobs. However, she hesitated before accepting it. Leaving the school where she had worked for so many years and where she had finally been recognized was a difficult decision. But her children convinced her that this was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. After accepting the offer, Mrs. Rodriguez organized a farewell gathering at the school. She prepared homemade treats and invited everyone who had been a part of her life over the years. The evening was filled with warm words, memories, and tears of joy. Barron, who had become a true friend to her, gave a heartfelt speech, thanking her for everything she had done for the school and for him personally. He said that her example had taught him to value the work of others and to be more attentive to those around him. After leaving the school, Mrs. Rodriguez's life truly transformed. She was able to spend more time with her children, who were thrilled to have their mother home in the evenings. Her eldest son was accepted into medical school, Her middle daughter began preparing to enter a teaching college, and her youngest son was overjoyed that his mother could now attend his school performances. Mrs. Rodriguez felt that her sacrifices had not been in vain and was proud of her children. Barron and his Light of Kindness Club continued their work. They organized charity events, helped elderly residents in the community, and hosted activities for children from low-income families. Mrs. Rodriguez's story became a symbol for them, a reminder of how one act of kindness could change someone's life. Barron realized that his mission was not to stop at what he had already achieved, but to keep finding ways to make the world a better place. Years passed. Barron graduated from school and went on to university, where he continued his charitable work. He often thought back to Mrs. Rodriguez and that day when he first saw her on her knees, scrubbing a paint stain from the floor. That moment had been a turning point for him, changing his perspective on life. He understood that true strength lies in kindness and the ability to notice those who need help. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become a symbol of hard work and resilience, continued to inspire people. Her story was included in textbooks as an example of how kindness and gratitude can change the world. Her children grew up to be successful, but never forgot that their mother was a true hero. They often shared with their friends and colleagues how their lives had been transformed by the kindness of one person. One day, Barron decided to organize a major event to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Light of Kindness Foundation, which he had established after leaving school. He wanted the event to be more than just a celebration. It needed to inspire even more people to perform acts of kindness. He invited everyone who had ever been part of his projects, including Mrs. Rodriguez and her family. The event was held in a large concert hall, decorated with photos and stories of people whose lives had been changed by the foundation. When Mrs. Rodriguez stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. She shared her story, starting from the days when she worked as a janitor at the school and ending with how her life had changed thanks to Barron's kindness and the support of the community. Her speech was filled with sincerity and gratitude. She spoke about the importance of noticing the people around us, valuing their work, and not being afraid to show kindness. Her words moved everyone in the audience, and many couldn't hold back their tears. After her speech, Barron took the stage. He thanked Mrs. Rodriguez for her inspiration and for becoming a symbol of how kindness can change the world. He then announced that the Light of Kindness Foundation was launching a new program to help children from low-income families access education. The program was named Rodriguez's Dreams in honor of Mrs. Rodriguez and her determination to give her children a better future. The announcement was met with thunderous applause, and Mrs. Rodriguez, standing on the stage, couldn't hold back her tears of joy. After the event, Barron and Mrs. Rodriguez spent a long time talking. She thanked him for everything he had done for her and her family, and he in turn told her that she had been the one to inspire him to embark on this journey. They both understood that their story was not just a coincidence, but an example of how one act of kindness could spark something much greater. Years later, Barron continued to expand his foundation, while Mrs. Rodriguez enjoyed a life she had once thought impossible. Her children grew up to be successful, but they always remembered that their mother was their true hero. They often shared their story with others, showing how their lives had been changed by the kindness of one person. The story of Mrs. Rodriguez and Barron became a legend. It was told in schools to inspire children to perform acts of kindness. It was featured in films and written about in books. But most importantly, it remained in the hearts of those who had been a part of it. This story reminded everyone that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to great changes, and that every person, regardless of their profession or status, deserves respect and gratitude.